And pulling the lens back from here east and looking at creative capital cities in general, what do you think are the perhaps two or three things that they all have in common?
They're hungry. And when I say they're hungry, I mean there's this eagerness to participate, to be in the conversation, to do things not just for the sake of doing it, but for things that really, really matter. Like one of the NABA's projects, for example, is also how do we include the element of sustainability into fashion? Students are experimenting and maybe they are trying different textile, different printing, different colors. Can you be an education institution, run fashion courses, and be sustainable?
Diego, welcome. Tell me, what does NABA stand for?
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for having me. NABA stands for Nuova Accademia di Belle Arti, which translates into New Academy of Fine Arts. As an Italian name, as originally was an Italian institution.
You operate across many disciplines. Tell me what those are and what then makes NABA distinct.
So we have two campuses, well now three with London, but our first two campuses are the first one in Milan, and that was the original one, if you want, the OG one that was built in 1980. And then we added another one in Rome. And now we're in London, of course. I think that what's NABA DNA really is this approach of a combination of thinking and making. And especially in the education sector, this is extremely important, right? Because the thinking is not just learning things by heart or learning the theory. It's asking yourself why. Maybe we should be looking at another perspective and so on. And then you have the making part. And the making part is where the students are in our labs and they work on prototypes, they experiment, and they're finding themselves, and that's I think is the beauty of this combination, is that they find themselves like starting a project, then go back to it and then revisit it, because it's that element of adding element of criticality while building muscle memory that eventually is going to get ready for the career that they want to pursue. So I think that is not just a traditional education institution where you learn the theory and then off you go, put it in practice. We are already working with the students and different industries so that the students are ready and have found the voices and they're ready for their career.
Centering on Milan then, it's a city that has this kind of intimate marriage between industry and design. And I wonder how that sort of sense of place, if you like, has shaped the evolution.
Quite interesting, because I originally am from there. So I grew up in Milan, and I think that I grew up with all the fashion shows and the Salone del Mobile and the design weeks, and I think I almost gave it for granted, right? And then when I moved to the UK years ago, I kind of like re-look into that and looked like, for example, at London and all the creative hubs and so on. And like, starting to appreciate all of it and all the opportunities that have given me. So when you talking about, for example, NABA campus being in Milan, you have this very traditional Italian heritage aspect that shapes not just NABA or the universities, but the city itself. You have a busy calendar. I would say that with all the fashion weeks and the events and the design weeks and so on. And these are all opportunities for people within the sector to connect. This is where relationships are built. This is where, you start developing few projects and so on. So it becomes a little bit like this creative hub, the room where it happens. And that's how I would say, NABA fits into all of it.
Where do you think that comes from for Milan? Is it cultural? Is it historical? Is it just something in the water?
I think it's a bit of a combination of both cultural, historical, maybe not in the water, but it is quite funny. There's always been a bit, and I think it's an Italian almost trait that I'll give you an example, right? And it could be like a very silly one. But when I'm home at my parents and my mom says, "Oh, we need to pop to the supermarket," I'd be like, "All right, let's go." And my mom would be like, "No, hold on, I need at least 20 minutes." And I'm like, "Why?" She would, apply herself makeup. She would dress up accordingly, according to her, etc., etc. There's this element that when you go out and about, you dress, not necessarily you dress to impress, but you dress accordingly to where you're going. So I think it's also very cultural. And if you have happened to be strolling around the cities of Milan or Rome or Naples, you do see a bit of an Italian style, right? You may not be able to quite put your fingers on it, as in what makes it Italian, but you see that there's attention. And it's not just a gender thing. It's not just women that are paying attention to what they're wearing. It's the same aspect is like with men. The same aspect is with teenagers. Because all the idea as well of what groups or you belong to or you do not belong to, it is culturally, you express it by the way you are dressing, by the watch that you're wearing, by your jewelry, and so on. And I think that aspect is an aspect that is in our everyday life, because even when you don't want to conform, for example, to the fashion industry, you're making choices that reflect the conformity or non-conformity of the fashion industry itself.
So Italy has a tradition of treating craft as a really serious discipline.
There is definitely the element that, it is, we're still within the academic rigor, we're still an education institution. I think that, I'm not sure whether I agree with this taking it or not taking it seriously. I think there's a big element of experimenting and finding yourself. That's a key element of NABA. When I talk about the students come and they have an idea of what they want to do. They have an idea of what they want to study or the artist that they want to be. They don't necessarily, though, have experimented all the different ways. They haven't found what I call their voices, right? So what NABA really, what is in the DNA, is to make sure that the students are able to find their voice and express themselves. And maybe that expression means that you get a bit creative, that you try different things, and some things will work, some things not so much. So I think that there's always the element that you, even if you are experimenting, it's not that you're not taking things seriously, you're just trying to find what works for you and what can then work for others.
What was it about London that made you think this would be a good place to open another branch?
So I'm going to give you a bit of a secret, meaning that London is the starting point for us, for NABA going international. NABA has been in Italy and we're like, okay, what's next? Where can you go? London made total sense because of the combination of different factors. The creative hub that London is itself, the fast-paced city, the multicultural aspect that I absolutely adore within the city, and the fact that you can take different elements as well and put them together. And, then you also have the UK world of academia, and the combination of these two is like no-brainer. We must open in London. And it's not necessarily a coincidence that we're here. We are in Hackney Wick because Hackney Wick historically has always been a bit like the artsy neighborhood, right? So for us, when we then find here East and we found the space that we wanted and it looked absolutely gorgeous, it was just like pieces of the puzzle fitting in together. It was like, yes, that's it. So the idea is that we're going to start here in London, of course. And, if I like to be thinking that this is the first step for NABA going international, there may be other NABA venues popping up around the world. But I think that it made total sense that we would start from here.
And I mean, you mentioned here, East, and I wonder how important it is to you that by being here, you are tapping in and interacting with all of the other creative and academic and tech institutions that are also based here. How important is that community?
I think it's a must. You know that quote, no man is an island, right? I think that very much also refers to the industries, and especially when it comes down to the personal network that you build and institutions. I want to give you some concrete examples, but the school director of the LMA, the Liverpool Media and Art School, he's called Jenny. Hi, Jenny, if you're listening. And she is the most welcoming person I've ever seen. And when I came over, we had a chat, and, we could potentially see each other as competitors, let's say, but we're not. We are like tapping into different disciplines, and we are both in the creative work. And we thought, okay, do we have some synergies that can work together? Is there something that we can do that can help your student and my student? And we already kind of have a plan, let's say, on how students can collaborate on some projects. And that's just to give you like one of the examples. There's another element for me that was extremely important when we got into Here East. And that's also the element of security and safety. When we thought about opening in London, you're also thinking, okay, the market is quite saturated. Central London, you have these historical buildings. Where do we go? And when we then get to Year East, we were like, oh yeah, that is the place. You feel very safe. You feel very secure. I feel that my students are safe. There's constant patrolling. The area around is gorgeous. If it's a nice sunny day, the river is my go-to place. It's just a combination, and the space are big. And, for us, that we actually have labs. We have a fashion lab, we have a design lab, we have like a textile lab. It was important that we had the combination of a safe space and and somewhere that is able to accommodate all of our requests, let's say.
And pulling the lens back from Here East and looking at creative capital cities in general, what do you think are the perhaps two or three things that they all have in common?
They're hungry. And when I say they're hungry, I mean, I participating myself into different kind of like networking events, or like fashion shows, design shows, and so on. And what you see is that there's this eagerness to participate, to be in the conversation, to be part of the conversation, but also to do things not just for the sake of doing it, but for things that really, really matter. One of the NABA's projects, for example, is also how do we include the element of sustainability into fashion, right? Where students are experimenting and maybe they are trying different textile, different printing, different colors. Can you be an education institution, run fashion courses, and be sustainable? And I don't think that, the answer is no. There's the question of like, okay, let's start breaking it down and look at different perspective. What can we do? What can we not do? And I think that the fashion world itself, if you think about it, has changed so much. In the last, I would say, like, even if you go 50, 20, 10 years, the different importance that we give to things, from, for example, not having necessarily like a body type that would define what a model is, to then be looking at this sustainable fashion, or how even the fast fashion, is it like worth it, is it not, what are the risks, and so on. So is a conversation that keeps happening. And I think that that's the important element that I've noticed, that in the big cities where the fashion is a bit like, I would say, almost like a second name to the city. Other cities are actually not afraid to be part of the conversation. You can't just jump on a trend and hope for the best.
Do you think that there is a danger that cities like Milan and London could be victims of their own success? Too polished, too successful, too expensive?
That is such an interesting question. I think that maybe to a certain extent, a bit like a bit like everyone, right? You get branded. You do get a bit of some, maybe even some stereotypes, maybe some kind of like reputation, if you want. And then I think that each city, though, is not just one thing. It's a combination of different things together, and they all have different facets, right? So yes, I do agree. Of course, London is, an expensive city. We all know that. In the same way that Milan is way more expensive than other cities, for example, in Italy. Are they a bit victims of what they're good at? Possible, potentially, yeah. But does it mean that they should start being what they are? I don't think so.
You've talked of London as a sort of jumping off point to the rest of the world. Where do you think the next surprising hub of creativity might be?
We should be looking at some Asian country, and Asian Pacific specifically. I recently was in Japan, for example, and there are elements, for example, they may not be necessarily almost made Western to a certain extent, but they all have this really creative industry hub, let's say, that speaks right for that country and for some other countries within that region. So I think that, when we're looking at fashion, you're thinking of most likely, if you say Fashion 21, they would answer, oh, yeah, Milan, London, Paris, right? And I like to say, what about Tokyo and Singapore, for example, India? I think that there are, earlier I was talking about how great London is in terms of being multicultural. And that is the element that I think the students enjoy the most, is because you're not just going with the traditional Italian style. You are mixing a little bit of this cultural heritage. And here we're very, very lucky because we do have cultural heritage coming from a little bit everywhere, right? And when you mix these items together, that you have this new creation.
Diego, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time.